All right, so the section that we're going to focus on is the principles of composing for a video game. And if you have never kind of approached creatively a musical instrument, uh, it might look intimidating. And really, my purpose is to make you experience music and have fun with it. So if you feel intimidated, don't run away. I mean, I really wanted to bring you back to the keyboard or to the sequencer and try it out. There's nothing right or wrong. And being inspired by music is the best way to learn about. You don't have to be a composer of this class, but maybe you will find this as something else that you can express yourself with. So if we want to focus on some kind of a short clip that you want to introduce a game, um, we will try to think, well, how we actually organize or get inspiration for music. So, except for getting organized here, a little blur, let's talk about the technique and the inspiration. Well, once you think about, you need to compose something, you can either consider, what music theory methods are suitable, and what are the specific technical limitations. So combining these three things, some kind of a mood, place, action, or character, which could be kind of the source of your inspiration, musical methods that start with chords or melody, bass, rhythm, structure, and I'll talk a little bit more in detail, and we'll go back, talk a lot about adaptive techniques towards the end of the class. These are the technical things. And then the music theoretical things, sorry, and the technical ones are questions about what instruments are going to play, are you going to use sound design? So I want to kind of just clarify these three categories, and I think it helps, to take away maybe some fear or motivate or encourage and inspire you by saying, well, here's how I can approach a musical project. By my musical inspiration, one of these four. So you have these three. This one is broken into these four, a little bit more details about the theory and so on. Music very often is considered as an art that manipulates emotion most than any other type of art. Visual art is much more representative. You depict specific things, and you can document historical events. The representation aspect of music is much more intricate in some sense. You don't exactly represent music. With the advance of new technology, recording techniques, we actually capture sounds of physical objects, of events that have nothing to do with musical instruments. We incorporate them, and then many times we do hear a specific sound. So let's think about music at this point that does not include sound effects or recordings of actual outside sounds. So if it's not representational, how do you create a certain mood? Well, things that we'll talk about, chords, melody, bass, they're kind of components of music that allow you to change the mood of the piece. So scales, major is sometimes considered happy, minor is sad. Things that are fast create much more of an excited or rhythmic or energized feel than music that goes slowly, how rhythmical it is. All of these things reflect on mood. Harmonious music, how many instruments there are. I'm using mood for really one word that can be broken into so many little different things. But think about like what feeling you want music to have. Place. So each place might have its own feel or mood, but also it might have something more representative. So we kind of a little bit get representation here If this is a city, probably you want to include something that kind of relates to the fast pace of the city. If it's day or night, that's also part of place. But if you're somewhere in the nature and it's a peaceful character, it changes your mood. So you might start with the place and think about, either the action that that place inspires or the mood that this place has. But it's slightly different aspect of music. And same thing about, the action, which could be sort of separate from the place or part of the place, the character that you want this, if the game introduces specific characters, you might think about the villain versus, the boss or your protagonist. Is he likable? Do you want the melody to be memorable? We'll give a separate assignment with trying to focus on the theme, something that is memorable, something that you could assign a character to a theme. So at this point, we'll mostly talking about place and mood. So your first exercise really is trying to create a certain atmosphere for an opening scene. So 1 and 2 are your main focus point for homework 1. How do you compose? So we'll also really start with chords first technique. At least if you read the homework, you will notice that the explanations are suggesting you to lay out some chords using LMMS. And for those who haven't yet, who missed my last lecture on Monday, I was describing the LMMS and the specific technique of laying out chords and creating arpeggios. So this is kind of following this line of thought that the homework describes in words. And as I already said, and I will keep repeating myself, I mean, you're free to use any technique and you can come up with your own methods of composition, but we try to be didactic. And the idea of chords first, and you need to understand what chords are, aggregates of notes that sound together in some kind of a pleasant way, or have a certain color that captures you. If you lay them out first, and you think about chords as chord progressions, as these kind of constructs of sounds, sound blocks that kind of give you change of mood or atmosphere through that short segment. You might want to design this chord progression first. And a lot of Western music, and we'll talk more about this later, actually start with specific chord progressions. There are so many chord progressions that people memorize and use that it almost becomes, a template. Let's compose. So, you take not even as elaborate as 12-bar blues. You can have 3 or 4 chord sequences, and we'll see one of them later, that could be reused for so many different musical songs or musical pieces. So this is one way to do it. Another one is actually whistle and melody. And this is something very natural to us. You sing a lullaby, you kind of remember a song, and then you kind of improvise. And since our voice is producing usually one pitch, it's a very intuitive way. Think about a melody, start with this melody. If you do that, you might want then to match the chords to the melody. Another way is to use a bass, and a bass is really important. Even if, people who play in a band understand how important the bass is. Some people say bass makes you happy. If you don't have a bass, your whole music is kind of floating in the air, which is sometimes good, but then once it's grounded, you kind of feel that feel of maybe satisfaction. So you can go and create the bass first, and some of the music techniques like figured bass, which was a very common way of writing music in the Renaissance period, was actually using this. They would give you the bass notes. They will give you maybe some clues about what chords could be written. And then you will actually, from bass, you will derive the chords and the melody. Kind of summarizing all of these three is that knowing which notes to put together from the bottom to top, bass is the bottom, melody is the top, chords are basically all of them together, but also all the notes in between. This is the essence of writing Western music or typing in notes in LMMS. And you just need to decide uh, um, what is the easiest way for you, the most suitable way or intuitive way to get started. Do you want to write the bottom line and then kind of fill up the rest? Yeah, how you construct your musical scaffolding, and eventually from that scaffolding you create the actual music. Um, the rhythm part, I kind of kept it separate because here we're talking really more about the notes themselves, how they relate to each other in terms of pitches, but timing. We are very, very sensitive to rhythm. And of course, if you put just a drum loop, you don't need to think about, the actual instrument. You choose the instrument, but you don't think about notes. You don't think about different voices. You might decide that, okay, well, this theme actually, you know, makes me imagine certain rhythm that corresponds to the mood or the place. I'll lay out the rhythm first, and maybe a rhythm I can loop several times, and then I start building on top of the rhythm. Uh, Structure, we will not deal with structure until later on. Actually, your home tech quiz will be more about structure, because once we know how to build little segments of music, then the question becomes, well, you have a phrase, and then you have another phrase, and then maybe you have an opening, you have the chorus, you have the verse, you have a bridge. So once you start thinking about larger blocks of music, that's what we mean by structure. But in some cases, you start with the structure. You kind of say, well, actually, I don't know what the music will be, but I know how to subdivide it. I don't know exactly what the house is going to look like, but I know I need a bedroom, and I need a kitchen, and I need whatever, a garage, right? So you kind of like start playing around with the structures, even if you don't know how they look like. And the last thing is the adaptive matrix design. This is the most game or adaptive music one, where you even consider this not only on the level of musical form for each scene, you think across all of the scenes. You think about, well, I have a game, it has so many scenes, so many situations, and now I need to think about all the transitions between scene one and scene two. Maybe scene one jumps to scene three, and then from three you can go back to two and jump to seven, and from there move to eight. Once you have this kind of a really large picture, so you know where you start, you know where you end, but in between you might have a lot of possible trajectories, and maybe you have more than one place to end. Uh, this is what we call a matrix. It's all the scenes, all the possibilities of switching, or even within one scene. If you move, and we saw some examples in our last class, where the same scene you can move and explore maybe different areas in the city or in a building, or World of Warcraft. You fly across the river into the forest. Um, Maybe it's one scene in the game, but even in that scene you have these sub elements. So instead of thinking about fixed structure, okay, and this is really kind of the linear composition technique, you think about blocks, and you think about how to build my music so that I can juxtapose it as a puzzle and create many different variations. Um, Instrumentation, well, now you come down and say, well, I want to play my instruments in certain ways, but you need to know, is it going to be chiptune, electronic synthesizer? It's going to be something musical instruments? Are you going to studio, or are you doing everything on some electronic circuit? And also for, at least historically, a big part of the ingenuity, or the geniuses who created games had to deal with the fact that they had to use very limited memory, very limited abilities and polyphony, only few voices. So you might set it up as a specific constraint, and you might set it up today without even having a good justification, just for the purpose of resembling. So if you want to be doing a piece that is loyal to some vintage game sound, you might want to follow then all the little difficulties that game had, and that requires, if you really want to recreate a specific feel of a game of the past, you might want to follow very specific constraints. But for many cases, you just decide on your own. I mean, these are the instruments. This is what I'm to work with, because the possibilities are tremendous. And then there is the concept of sound design. So I want you to be familiar with the concept of instrumentation, which means the types of instruments, and sound design as a way to create your own instrument. Sound design actually has two different aspects. One is, how do you find the presets? How do you find the sounds? And if you use electronic sounds, you start tweaking them to create a specific sound color, a timbre. So timbre is an important term to understand. And when you will play with the beat invader and with the different waveforms, we'll talk about sound color. Another thing is kind of usually is done in the either post-processing phase. So you have your composition and you add effects like reverb or some other filters, and can change the mood, but not by changing the contents of the musical notes being played, but by adding some other effects. This is post-processing, but many times you actually have to add specific sound effects. These could be things that relate to what's happening in the game, but many times these sound effects become so integrated with the music that they are part of the music. But it's slightly different thinking. Sound effects would be something you probably would record or find a library of sound effects that won't be called as a musical instrument, and you will trigger them less by deciding which notes you put, but just by what is the sound effect as this whole musical thing, and where you put it and how it actually affects the music itself. And we'll start our journey, the composition, and this is what you're instructed to do in first homework, is actually to use the Beat Invader, or you could also use the Nintendo Entertainment System kind of a chip, NES, that used waves or waveforms as the basis of sound synthesis. So I will not play this video because it's relatively long, and this is part of something that you might want to go through on your own in your own pace. But kind of to explain what we're talking about, we'll be basically showing, and I don't want to.
And further apart.
Sorry. We'll be talking about some of this is just the physics, basically how air propagates, what are waves, because sound is basically a bunch of sound waves. And I'm not sure if I can skip this without making this play, but yeah, so, and how it's recorded in terms of electrical signals and waveforms that we'll be using for synthesizing. But that kind of gives the whole explanation, which is a little bit more of physics. But once you start talking about different waveforms, like this pulse wave, which corresponds to basically changes in air pressure, you have like a lot of pressure and suddenly drop of pressure, and the rate and the way these waves and the air pressure waves behave, the manner they arrive over time, these pulses, you perceive them as different tones. So this is really important kind of to understand, because these concepts of the shape of the form, the duty cycle, they're actually buttons on your synthesizer. So you can basically go and eventually create a sound by combining a lot of the basic sound shapes and trigger them with your synthesizer. I also mentioned Audacity. I haven't yet given an introduction to Audacity, but you can find a link. Audacity is a sound editor. You don't need this for your first exercise, but if you're curious about using sound and you want to jump into that, Audacity will be useful for later homework assignment 3. Definitely will benefit from you being able to import sounds and not just work with the sound editor and notes. But if you take Audacity, you can upload some waveforms and you can start getting a better feel of what this is. This is basically how vibrations in the air behave and how they're related to notes and timbre. So check out this video. This one a little bit goes more in depth to talk about the specific waveforms of the Nintendo, and uses the Koji Kondo's Legend of Zelda as an example. I think once you see this synthesized with these very basic waveforms, and you see about how each waveform actually kind of tries to capture different aspects of music. We spoke about the chords and spoke about the melodies. So think about now, well, here is somebody who actually kind of uses in such a great artistic way uh, different timbres. He designs them, waveforms, he synthesizes something, but then he actually is able to create rhythm. He's able to create, well, there are only a few voices here, so it's not really thinking about harmonies, but there is aspect of harmony. And of course, there are melodies and rhythm, which are really captivating. So check out this video. I think it kind of like gives you really a good insight into all of these concepts just by taking the vintage sound, the chiptune, visualizing this and using this legendary theme, the Legend of Zelda, and showing how it works. So this is really kind of the core music theory, music technology, and its relation to games. But chiptune music became actually a style of its own. And the more we had the sound chips available, some musicians actually took advantage of the fact that in computers like the Atari or the Amiga, which was the first one, you had sound chips, so you could really go and compose music for these new instrumental sounds. So there is a genre today called chiptune music or NES music, and this is an example for you to enjoy and just understand that the magic of music is that it starts somewhere, but then it becomes an entity of its own. And also the technology of trackers that we'll talk about in the next set of slides also kind of draws you towards a very specific types of musical styles. This is pretty much all about the basics of composing video for composing music for video games. And yeah, I'll meet you again in the next lecture. So let me kind of stop the recording here.